Obiakindi Sengitsamu, everybody. Today is Friday, January 19th. This is Justine Teba from the Pueblos of Santa Clara, Tesuque, and Acoma. I am in the Larry Casus Freedom Center in Albuquerque, Tiwa Territory with my comrade.
Singiti. Y'all remember me, Jen, co-host of the Red Nation podcast. Really, me and Justine are trying to bust out some content today. It's tough times out here, you guys. We have a whole lot on our minds and on our hearts. I think today we just want to share our sincerest thoughts and hopes with y'all. Um, because I know that I've been needing some reassurance in times like this. So yeah, it's kind of what we're doing today. Real informal, not as together as our usual TRN podcast, but nonetheless sincere.
Yes, we are responsible for today's recording. And so I was kind of like, what are we going to talk about? And there's actually kind of a lot to talk about in this moment. This morning, I was driving to Albuquerque from Acoma, and I was listening to Who is the Red Nation Part 1 and 2, which is one of the first two of the first episodes of the Red Nation podcast ever. And I've been sort of looking back at our work, where we were in the moment. I mean, this is pre-pandemic, pre-genocide, and it just got me thinking. So I was kind of listening to part one, and in that, Cena is interviewing Nick, and I kind of wanted to get a little bit into that because Jen, I just think that you are a Pueblo person who needs to be interviewed, and but also I would just like to do a conversation with you, have a little bit of back and forth going on. So that being said, that episode was recorded, or the beginning of the Red Nation podcast was in 2018, the fall of 2018. We consider our birthday Indigenous Peoples Day. Um, and Jen and I both are on Who is the Red Nation Part 2. And um, we're different people. We are not the same. We have been changed, we have grown, and I kind of just want to, I guess, maybe start there. So, Jen, how have you changed since 2018?
Oh my, oh my. Um, I, I've changed a lot. Back then I was still liberal. I didn't think I was, and unlearning liberalism is a lifetime work. It doesn't ever stop. We're born into the black muck that is liberalism. It covers us, right? It's like being born into oil. It's not easy to clean up, it's not easy to unlearn, it's not easy to confront, especially when it's like so deeply internalized. Since then, um and I've talked about this a little bit on the podcast, but developing politics about the sex trade really helped me develop my feminist politics. And it really forced me to confront a lot of things internally. You've heard me talk about that before, but I think also there was a lot of humbling experiences that we faced collectively as human beings, as living beings on this planet. The pandemic, really looking at the most horrific genocide in the 21st century, live streamed, seeing it daily through our phones. That would change anyone. That changes anyone with the heart, right? That changes anyone with humanity. And it really changes, or not changes, but it highlights what's really at stake for us. For me, I've been learning to take a step back, and really, really listen before I act or speak. It's really humbled me in that I kind of moved with this very bold confidence before I was entirely sure about something. And that's not to say that, we should hold ourselves back or anything. But, for me personally, really, really moving more intentionally with the political work, and just, everything I do has been a big deal. That's a big part of why I left social media. And I feel a little guilty about that sometimes too. For those of you who used to follow me, like, just please know I'm still accessible and you can reach out to me if you want to chat or anything like that. I gave a lot of folks my phone number. Don't be shy. But um, really thinking about what it means to have a platform, to be a public figure, and the great responsibility that comes with it. I chose to leave so that I could work on myself and be better for myself and for everyone around me. Um, but more than that, something that I've been thinking about a lot, especially when thinking about Palestine and our relatives in Gaza, is what Demetrius shared a couple episodes back about Palestine, where he says, when our relatives are experiencing death and grief, it's the responsibility, right? In Pueblo ways and Dene ways, it's the responsibility of the extended family to come through and take up that burden and take up the labor and take up the work while the immediate family mourns. And so I've been trying to really bear that in mind and be like, if ever there was a time for us to be strong, it's right now. This isn't a time for us to get caught up in our own fear and our own hopelessness. Although it's very hard. Like, I struggle with this daily, and I really, really, them demons got hands, like, for real. And so I really try to remember that this is not the time for fear. This is not the time for fear, especially not for us in the belly of the beast. Even if we experience all the horrors of colonialism 500 years later. We need to be strong for our relatives, and each other and ourselves. I really think we need to, like, learn to trust ourselves, which is really hard. And something that people don't think about always is the internal work that comes with wanting to serve a greater purpose and wanting to do, really big things. It's intimidating to think that you're at the center of something that could have long-lasting impacts on the entire world. It's intimidating, but we all do. We all have such importance that we should not underestimate at a time like this. And as much as it's a time to be humble, it is also a time to truly embrace ourselves and our confidence and the purpose that we have in this world, to better the world, to ease suffering, to build a future. And, like, my sincerest hopes for Pueblo people are to take that role very seriously. Even if the US and our relationship to it makes us feel like our power is limited, we need to remember that our power is not derived from the United States. It's not derived from the Catholic Church. It's not derived from any settler institution. We know where our power comes from. That doesn't need to be said on this podcast. And I hope we remember that. And I hope we remember our place in this world, our place, not only with our relationships with other humans, but with non-humans. Like, and, I'm a lay person. I don't have any authority. I don't have any power. These are just, like, my sincere and humble ruminations. I'm in no place to be giving advice to anyone, but I guess this podcast is kind of a space where me and Justine thought we could just air our sincere thoughts, like I said.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, that is also real. I too have been thinking about what Dee said about what our responsibility is in this moment while a genocide is happening in Gaza. Um so I guess from here we could go a couple ways. You did create a nice segue into talking about where we are as people, where the movement is, and where we have gone since 2018. Um, and actually, I think maybe the best way to move forward is to talk a little bit about the manifesto that we created back in 2019. This is right before the pandemic, and before our entire worlds had changed. And I was revisiting it, and I know you said that there are some things about it that you want to clean up, but at the time, and like you said, the process of getting here has like sincerely humbled us. Like, I humble is the word. I have taken a huge step back from doing thing organizing the way that I used to. Even listening to myself on the episode I mentioned earlier, I am a different person. I the confidence that I had back then, in being, an indigenous activist, has really changed. But going back to where our minds were at the time, um, Jen and I are both co-founders of the Pueblo Feminist Caucus, and then we sort of haven't really picked up that specific work in quite some time. But we created, along with others, a 6 point program, and I just wanted to go over just the 6 points. First one is number one, the end of heteropatriarchal violence. Number two, the end of excommunication and disenrollment on the basis of blood quantum. Number three, we demand an end to the weaponization of religion and toxic traditionalism. Number four, the end to exploitation of Pueblo culture and and sacred knowledge and objects. Number five, we demand an end to the glorification of the genocide of Pueblo people. And number six, we demand an end to land loss at the hands of corporate and settler interests. And before we hit record, we are sort of talking about what it means to be a feminist, what it means to be a Pueblo feminist, and like also like the dangers that comes with that, the way that we have been, the way that people are excommunicated from their villages, from their own families for speaking out about these things. We're talking about why um why that needs to change, and how we can approach like the naysayers and the men who will probably take offense to the things that we have to say. And one of the things we did talk about was just we were sort of talking about how we're going to approach it. And so I just want to, before we start talking about the manifesto, I just want to personally say that, like, we're not trying to reach the people who are the naysayers. We're not even trying to necessarily reach men. We are and we aren't. Uh, because right now we're trying to speak to Pueblo people who are looking for a way forward, who are looking to a Pueblo future that exists in all of its integrity. We're speaking to feminists who have yet to come and yet to be born. Like, if anything, um, I kind of walk forward with the hope that the words that we say right now will be used in the future for future Pueblo feminists as a testament that we said these things and we believed these things the entire time, because we look back at other feminists and revolutionaries in history and get that from them. So yeah, just kind of like laying out the general vibe of the conversation before we hit record. And I just want to see what you have to expand on that, Jen.
As far as the manifesto goes, there is a whole lot I would change. I would make the language more accessible. It's really wordy. I would want to consolidate it a lot and use less jargon. Um, I think there's ways to get our points across and give space for gender and sexual variance without using, the postmodern jargon that is being popularized on the internet, because it's really, it's a type of ignorance to assume that people in the past didn't have knowledge about these things, when our whole argument is that things like gender and sexual variance have always existed, right? In our communities. And really it's not even about that. It's not even about identity. It's just about liberation for everyone and for everything. I ideally we wouldn't even need to use terms like Pueblo feminist, because both, like, if you look at like the origin of both of those words, like, they are only a product of our colonial condition. Ideally we wouldn't even need those terms because it's just already inherent in our ways and our values as Pueblo people, you know, um, wherever we may come from, like, those values should just be inherent to our ways of life. It shouldn't be like an external thing or a separate movement or anything like that, right? Um, it should be inherent that women are valued and respected. It should be inherent, um, you know, that people of gender and sexual variance are just respected and valued, right? It's not far fetched things. It's not asking for special treatment. It's simply asking that we look with a critical eye on the ways in which patriarchy and machismo culture have remained intertwined into parts of what people claim are tradition. And this is the case for everybody everywhere. This is not something unique to Pueblo people um, now in the so called United States. This has been a struggle that all Indigenous people have dealt with. That's why I'm constantly looking to South America. I'm looking to the women's movements there. I'm looking to how Indigenous women, under these same circumstances, who are living in the aftermath of Spanish colonization, have dealt with these things, how they've confronted their leaders, how they've made changes, how they've had a voice politically. And it's very powerful. And that will always continue to inspire me because there's so much precedent for it, um, all over the world once we get to looking outside of our immediate locales. Another thing about the manifesto that I would change is I would want to really, really hash out what we mean when we say toxic traditionalism. And I want to say that toxic traditionalism is not a term that should be thrown around anytime somebody experiences something that they don't like, or something that just makes them feel somehow, or something that makes them feel some type of way, because that's selfish, okay? And shame and discipline serve a very specific purpose in our culture, and an important one, a very necessary one. If you know, you know. Like, there are times when we need to be hard on each other. There are times when we need to be very upfront. And like, that shame serves a purpose. It's a part of our discipline. It's a part of what allows us to do the things that we do in a very specific way they need to be done. So I would never ever undermine that or say that's something we need to get rid of, because I don't think we need to get rid of it. I think it's necessary. The life we live is hard. It's a hard one. And it's hard for a reason. And a part of upholding and wanting to ensure that our way of life continues is acknowledging that. Um, Capitalism is very selfish, it's very individualist. It rewards selfishness, it rewards individualism, it rewards us making a fuss about what makes us personally upset. And I think that a lot of people misunderstand us and they think that that's like the bus we're on, but it's not. It's quite the opposite. It's quite the opposite. So I'd want to really, like, for someone reading it, I would just hate for it to be misunderstood as like, oh, they're just complaining about being disciplined. Like, no, that is an essential part of our way of life and all the things we do. And we should be open to accepting that that is the type of discipline it takes to sustain our ways. So I would want to really break down for people and say that when we are talking about quote unquote toxic traditionalism, we are talking about the remnants of brutal colonization that remain, commonplace in our societies that no longer serve us. Okay, and the most easy to identify ones are having to do with the treatment of women and LGBTQ people and children, right? These are the most blatant ones. And again, I always say it's totally different from community to community. This is not a critique that can be applied evenly. We need to like get into the distinct material conditions that exist in each community, which is not my place, right? That I can only speak to my own community and experience. But nonetheless, we know that we have these commonalities in which, you know, this results in a lot of material violence. It breaks my heart that the time that I've been talking about this, like back when I had social media, I had countless women, Pueblo women and non Pueblo women, reach out to me saying, "Thank you for talking about this. I've never felt safe to talk about this." They'll tell me about the abusive relationships they've been in with Pueblo men. They tell me about the ways in which they've been mistreated. And it only happens on these private channels, right? Because there's such immense fear about what happens when you speak out about these things. People have confided in me personally, and I felt unqualified and I felt like, really taken back by these things, but also very honored that people felt comfortable being vulnerable with me, and that people felt empowered by what I had to share or what we had to share, because that's all I want. That's all I want is for Pueblo people to feel safe, for them to feel valued and heard. Um, And then I also want to reiterate that like Pueblo men are not the problem. They're not the enemy. Like if you're misconstruing what we say to think that, you're not really hearing us at all. Pueblo men suffer under patriarchy too. And that's something that, not all self-proclaimed feminists agree with. Like all men benefit from patriarchy and all men are also hurt from patriarchy. Um, Also, like conceptions of masculinity and femininity and what they meant to us pre-colonization, like our notions of what woman is or what man is today or what masculine or what feminine is today, um, would be completely unrecognizable to our ancestors. Completely unrecognizable. What we've been conditioned to think is masculine or feminine today, um, has nothing to do with our conceptions of it prior. Some examples I'll give is like today you hear a lot of influencers talking about like in my feminine energy, in my masculine energy. And if you listen to what they're saying, they're reinforcing pure misogyny, like 1950s trad wife, like ultra conservative misogyny, but it's being branded as empowering, it's the girl bosses talking about this stuff. And it's really wild because, again, if you know, you know. How do we start our prayers? What do we say in our prayers? Do we acknowledge one energy over the other? No, no, we don't. We understand the importance of balance. We understand that everybody has these energies and that they have nothing to do with like this then they have nothing to do with specific societal roles that only exist in the context of capitalism. And I feel like I've said this before, but like what were feminine roles back in the day? Building houses, butchering. What were masculine roles, right? Like weaving, these things that under capitalism within, the Eurocentric framework do not uh, fit within these real specific categories. And so I want people to really be critical of these popular narratives that are coming up and sometimes even being branded as being about empowerment because they're just traditional misogyny, like traditional in the sense that uh, in what is branded as like traditional American values, which comes from um, it comes from like Victorian era respectability politics. It comes from uh, Puritanism. It comes from uh, the needs of post World War II, the needs of the post World War II U.S. economy, right? The nuclear family. It's called the nuclear family for a reason. And so we must unlearn that to reestablish what kinship really means to us. To have strong families, we need to interrogate what capitalism considers a strong family, which is really isolationist, which is very individualist, right? It's two parents and their kids. And for us, we know that is not the case, right? We know that we're not raised like that still to this day, right? We have all our first cousins, we have all our aunties, we have our grandparents, like siblings, we have our words, our terms to refer to our family members. We don't, they're just, we know how that works, right? Everyone's our grandma, everyone's our auntie, everyone's our, like, we know that. We know that. Like, and honestly, like, what gives me a lot of hope is because we still have so much of that intact, we shouldn't be afraid for the harder times, and we shouldn't consider the US's problems our problems. I actually think that we're in a much better place to survive a lot of catastrophic stuff because we have our kinship mode still intact, because we have our communal ways of life so intact. We see the way we come together for each other when we need to. And I have all the faith in the world that we're going to be able to survive that. So this gets me to my next big thing is what weighs heaviest on my mind and heart every day. The one thing I wish I could really talk to everyone about, my family about, our leaders about is like, are our leaders thinking about what it's going to be like when the United States doesn't exist anymore? Because it's not an if, it's a when. And anybody who is paying attention to the world political climate and what is happening to the United States right now should be able to acknowledge this and accept it. That's not a far-fetched claim. It's not about doom and gloom. I absolutely don't want to be seen as somebody who's promoting fear and paranoia, because that's the last thing we need. Like, I sincerely want to know if our tribal leaders are thinking about our governance and how we're going to sustain ourselves without the United States. This is not a far-fetched question. Like, this is just my sincerest, because if we attach our life and our ways of life and our continuance to the United States, that's very fragile, because the United States is very fragile. So to the point that the idea of us governing ourselves without them is a threat to it in and of itself. Not just us, any native nation, and not just native nations, all of these other nations in the global south. It's such a huge threat to them. That's why they put sanctions on other countries. That's why they threaten us. Like, I think we need to have this conversation very, very seriously, because it's not something in our distant future at all. And it weighs on me. It weighs on me every day, every day. I don't want to see anyone get hurt. I don't want to watch us go hungry or thirsty. And that's the biggest issue. Like, realistically, the material thing we're going to face first is water, the lack of water. How many tribes are already battling for their water right now, from surrounding communities, from the state, from the government, from individual landowners? Like, this is happening already, and it's going to continue to come to the forefront. To call water is life is not metaphorical. It's a bit overused. It's the it's the it's the primary call representing Native movements for a reason, especially those of us here in New Mexico, where water is already so scarce. It scares me. People say that we trample tribal sovereignty just by simply talking about these things, but we don't talk about the entities that actually deny tribes rights to their land, water, and resources. How come we don't talk about those entities as trampling on tribal sovereignty? Instead, we talk about individuals as having the power to do that. Why would we want to align our sovereignty with the US's when we know it's so fragile? When we know that it can be toppled by ideology. Like, I know we're stronger than that, and I want everyone to believe that we're stronger than that. I want everyone to be able to envision very clearly and in such detail an image and a dream for the future, with or without the United States, or without the United States, like, because it's not gonna be here forever. But we were here before and we'll be here after. I'm also like, so I'm critical of like people calling the Pueblo Revolt the first US rebellion, because I'm like, the United States wasn't here. They didn't know what that was because it didn't exist. They weren't using that terminology. Like, and so how can we build that strength amongst ourselves, and how can we use our relationships with other indigenous people, not just tribes here but nations all over the world, to build that strength, to build that solidarity? And that's why Palestine is so important, because that's what it's helping us build, that's what it's helping us see. Like, even when, like, people are stunned by the resilience of Palestinian people as they're getting bombed, as they're getting starved out, but it's like, do you doubt that we'd have that same resilience? Or like, what, like, I guess I'm just thinking, like, of course they are, of course they are. It's not it's not a question for them, and it shouldn't be a question for us. It shouldn't be a question for us whether or not we'll live without our occupiers. Like, we have to.
So all those things being said, and thank you so much, Jen. Like everything you said was so brilliant. You're the reason why I joined the Red Nation. And I maintain the fact that so many Pueblo people are looking up to you simply because this is the way you think. And I am wondering, what do you personally think it is that is stopping people from that way of thinking, from from their thought process moving toward the idea of like, is the United States even going to exist in the future? You know, um, and everything else you said.
I think it's fear. And I don't blame any, like, here's another thing I really want people to understand. Like, I feel like people think, and I have been very judgmental throughout my life. Okay, I've been a straight up asshole. I regret a lot. I do, and I reflect on it all the time. All the time. I feel immense guilt for the way I've treated people in the past, but you don't need to be especially intelligent or politically active or have read a bunch of things or anything like that to just have a heart, to have a heart, and to really really look at the sources of the things that ail us. Of course there's many things that we need to take personal responsibility for, and that's another thing people get confused. Like, personal accountability is very important. It's going to be important no matter what. People absolutely need to take personal responsibility for things. However, it causes a great deal of pain to look at the sources of our shared pain, of our individual pain, and it pains people even more to see how it's all connected, right? When talking about the greater things in the world, I feel like there's a lot of fear because it upends their day to day life. It upends their personal goals and dreams about what they want. Nobody wants to think about starving or being thirsty. They want to think about creating a happy and healthy home for their children, right? Nobody wants to think about that because it's so demoralizing. And I don't blame anyone for not wanting to think about that. I don't blame anyone who has a hard time going in themselves, thinking about the things that have happened to them, things like domestic abuse and sexual violence, and thinking about the systemic role it plays in our communities. That it's really hard, especially when people have been made to feel like they're alone or like they don't matter. They've been told to just shut up, it happens to everyone. Like, of course they're not. It's hard to be brave about those things that are so personal, and it's even harder to talk about how they are related to suffering at large. It's really, really hard. And I don't blame anyone for not wanting to go there. I don't blame anyone for not wanting to have those uncomfortable conversations because it tears you open. It requires you to really just tear your heart and soul open. And but that is where growth comes from. That is where change comes from. Acknowledging the hardest of the hard things. Acknowledging, right? Like again, like another thing that people would reach out to me about when I was online, when I was public is so and so is in power, but I know that they're a pedophile. So and so is in power, but they brutalized my relative. So and so has this position, and everybody, let and everybody shame their victim for speaking out against them. Like it breaks my heart because you do feel a sense of powerlessness a lot of the time. I know I do, just, for being a woman, for being young, for being X, Y, and Z. Like, but there comes a time, and I think the time is now, that we can't let that fear override what needs to be done. Like, we are going through some changing times, not just in our personal lives, not just in our communities, not just as Pueblo people or Native people. It's the whole world. We're all in this together. And anyone who knows me, especially my family, knows that I've always thought about the quote unquote end times. Of course, I know they're not an end now. I'm excited for the beginning. I'm excited for the beginning of something new, but that ending's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough, and we have to live through it together. And I just want more than anything for people to be prepared, for people to be prepared, and for people to hold that kindness and that empathy in their heart, for people to hold that valuing of life that we say is core to our beliefs as Pueblo people. I want them to hold that. When we say we pray for the world, please mean it. Don't buy into like the Islamophobic crap we're seeing. Like please don't dehumanize people because of something you're seeing on the news. Like think with your head and feel with your heart, and it's that empathy that is going to help us survive. Like even going back to this concept of masculinity, I think it's such a profound injustice to men that they have to kill the sensitive parts of themselves to be considered men. I think it's just horrendous that masculinity, according to many people, especially in the United States, means that you distance yourself from being an empathetic person. I think it's awful that it means that you're distancing yourself from being somebody who cares for fellow humans. I think it's so dehumanizing, and men don't deserve to be dehumanized. Men aren't wild animals who are incapable of caring, right? They deserve to have masculinity encompass the deep and necessary feelings and love and appreciation for life that they have, that we all have. Strength isn't about lacking empathy. I think the most profound strength in the world is acknowledging your deepest hurt, is acknowledging like the ways in which you're able to do better for yourself. And so, and others like primarily, we need to maintain that empathy. We need to maintain that love. And that is what should guide our fierceness. That is what should guide our resistance. I feel like sometimes people misinterpret what we do as, being radical for the sake of being radical. No, this comes from a place of deep love for our people and people everywhere and life everywhere on this planet. And we reiterate that all the time, but there's no better time to reiterate it than now. Like capitalism is a death drive. It's a death affirming system. It rewards us for valuing death. It marks the greatest and most successful country. It claims that the United States is the most successful and powerful country because of how much life it has taken, not how much life it has given. Same for how that's seen like through the European imperialist lens everywhere. Is that A empire's power is gauged by how much it destroys, by how much life it takes, by how much it kills, by how much it conquers, not by how much life it gives, not how prosperous its people are. You know, the richest country in the world should not have the type of rates for unsheltered people that it does, the lack of accessible medicine, the lack of education. You might be the literacy rate in Gaza was so high, right? Even in their circumstances, because that drive for education, that drive for empathy, it's what drove them and sustained them. Like, and here, what is considered powerful, what is considered bravery, uh, it's being cowardly for the sake of being cowardly, right? US patriotism is about fighting a non existent enemy, an ideological enemy. And I would love to see us put our fierceness towards building, not taking, not scorched earth, you know? Like, and I know I'm not being very eloquent right now. I really am speaking with my heart more than my mind right now. But I want us to remember what is really at the core of our ways and to remember who our enemy really is, who and what causes our everyday and daily suffering and why. It's not Arab people, it's not Muslim people, it's not resistance groups trying to defend themselves, right? It's not socialists, it's not women, it's not queer people. Think deeply about exactly who and what is responsible for the things that ail you daily and all of us.
Whew. Man, this is gonna go like, so this recording is gonna go on the air and it's gonna be archived or whatever, and then it's like gonna be like in, 30, 40 years down the line, it's gonna be like how uh people like me or Kylie sit down and listen to John Trudell for hope. Jen, you're going the hell off right now. And it fills me with hope and just like optimism that we can get back to our humanity that way. Um so I kind of have like a doozy of a question, maybe even a little bit compromising. And you don't have to answer this, but just from everything you were talking about, let's say that you had the mic and you were guaranteed safety in your community and you were guaranteed to not be ostracized for saying this, and that you had the ears of all of the All Pueblo Governors Council and you were free to tell them anything you wanted. um what would that be like?
I would say, and this has been like my main ask, like, please consider prioritizing building our relationships with other indigenous peoples everywhere. Everywhere. Like, like I said, already Pueblo people, Pueblo men, right? Kind, compassionate, wise, wonderful Pueblo men that I have like the honor of knowing and having relationships with, uh, did try to extend those relationships when they hand delivered a letter to Evo Morales during the People's Gathering in Cochabamba in 2011. The very thing that inspired the Red Deal, you know, Pueblo people were at, trying to build those relationships, trying to build those bridges. I want that to happen, like with Bolivia, with Venezuela, with with Colombia, with these indigenous led governments who are building societies and governance structures based on their core values, not based on the occupiers' documents. And they are punished for it by the United States. Why? I understand that Pueblo leaders are also afraid of that same punishment. And we don't have nearly the numbers or the resources to defend ourselves like those countries. And it is for that reason that we need to work with them and we need to work with others so we can build our strength, so we could defend ourselves, we could defend our projects that are built on our core values. So we're not begging for crumbs, so we're not begging for the regionally allocated federal monies. And we need to like it it can't be about individual power, someone holding a position. Like, we need to be thinking 100 years into our future and into our past all the time. I understand that it's hard because we need to feed our people right now. We need infrastructure for our people right now, right? Like, we people, I'm sure tribal governments, they want to make sure that the people's needs are met right now in this moment. And they do, and they make compromises to make sure that we get that, to make sure that we get that federal monies. But I think we need to remember how quickly we'll be disregarded too. I think we need to remember what happens in those cases where we're looking to defend a piece of land, where we're looking to defend our water and our aquifer. We need to remember the role that the US federal government has played historically when we're looking at the preservation of our land or the pollution of our lands. We need to look at who is going to have our back. And it's complicated, right? Sometimes we depend on things like the Supreme Court to help us assert our rights, right? The recent ICWA case. Sometimes we do need to depend just because that's the nature of tribal law. And again, I'm not critiquing government or tribal leaders for playing that game, because of course we have to, and I know that. I'm not stupid. Like, I do have some education in that back. I have that background, right? Like, I really don't like to bring up my education, but I have it, and I know what the game is like. But we've reached a period where we really need to be brave and take some risks, because we're seeing how fragile these systems are. Um, and to me, it's as scary as it is exciting, because we're getting a chance to do these things on our own. That chance is being given to us in the weakening of like the federal structure. The the United States has lost popular support on the world stage because it continues to provide Israel with bombs to carry out its genocide. And another thing I really want tribal leaders to know, like, this is probably the main thing I'd mention if given this chance, is this conversation on Palestine is making everyday people, right? Non Indian people, white people, people everywhere. It's making them think, oh shit, Palestine is occupied. Palestine deserves its land back. Palestinians are right to resist that. And so are Native people in the United States. Why don't we give them their sovereignty? Why don't we give them the status as Native nations? Why don't we give them the land back? Oh my God, we're occupiers here. Like, wow, like Native nations deserve this. And when random non Indian people are starting to think those things because they're seeing what's happening in Palestine, so should our tribal leaders. We have such a huge window of opportunity here right now, where people who are getting behind Palestine are then being led to think, based on what they're seeing in Palestine, are being led to think, oh my God, why are Native nations treated like this in the United States? Why don't they have the right to govern their lands and themselves? I think that's huge. There's a huge conversation about Native sovereignty and Native nationhood here that is being brought up and widely talked about amongst young people and non-Native people, and of course Native people themselves. That I know our tribal leaders privy to this, because they should be, and they should really, really, really be taking advantage of it. We have such a huge window of opportunity to really, really push our fight to strengthen our sovereignty right now, because people are coming to this conclusion based on understanding settler colonialism in Palestine. It is helping them understand the settler colonial project here that is ongoing. And it is making them want to support Native nations' right to reject the advances and the stronghold of the United States. We have popular support now for making moves like that. That's huge. It's unprecedented. I didn't think I'd see anything like this anytime soon. And I would just want to make, I would want to help make tribal leaders privy to these conversations happening and let them know that it's not just a fringe conversation happening by a few people who are so radical. Nah, this is huge. This is our chance. This is our chance. And we can strengthen ourselves by being in solidarity with Palestine, and like in a very real functional way. We can quite literally strengthen the power of our native nations to make decisions about ourselves and for our future via, you know, that solidarity with Palestinians. So that's the main thing I would say, is that people are thinking about our nationhood. Are you?
Dang. No, absolutely, Jen. Um, yeah. Well, Pueblo, from Pueblo to Palestine, like we even have the same climate. When I went to Palestine, I came back feeling um robbed because the old cities in Palestine look like Acoma. They look like the old cities look like the modern day ancient cities that we were robbed of and that we were supposed to have. And I'm really glad that you brought that up. We really do mean it when we say that Palestine is the tip of the spear. Um, so um, is so all of that being said, um, what would you say that are the needs of Pueblo people that need to be addressed right now?
There's so much, and I'm only one person, but we need our water sources secured, clean, drinkable water. It needs to be secured for centuries, not years, centuries. And anyone who's familiar with our water situation in New Mexico knows that that's a little bit of a pipe dream at this point, unfortunately. And it's going to take a hell of a fight to secure that, not just for Native nations, not just for Native nations, for everyone here. Um, we're getting a lot of gentrifiers, you know, when the rich white folks move in, they want to create a resort, they want to build a home. That's the first thing they're trying to do. They buy subterranean rights, they buy water rights, they buy huge swaths of land, they buy entire acequias. That needs to be fought against, not just by Native people, by everyone here who's been on this land. I'm always talking about, like, you know, we need to team up again. We need to team up again the way we've been. Everyone who caretakes the land, native or non-native. If you caretake the land, it's your responsibility.
Jen, can you expand on what you mean when we say we need to team up again?
Yeah, bro. Like natives, Hispanos, Geniceros, like people who've been posted up for a minute, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Like, we have these relationships, like, with the non-native communities around us. Sometimes they're tenuous because of things like water rights, but there's a bigger enemy now, and now's not the time to be working against each other.
I guess I was trying to get the historical events that had happened because even before me getting politicized, like I actually had no idea how many rebellions and how many times we've actually teamed up.
My favorites are the Battle of Timayo and the Taos Rebellion. Those are some pretty kick-ass instances of Pueblos, other natives, and uh, you know, poor Hispanos and Geniceros working together. to combat American occupation. And not just American occupation, but like the rich landowners, the hacienda owners, right? Class struggle is essential to what we do, right? The poor Hispano people who are pro Oñate and just hate us, they're not our enemy. They're not because they don't really have a lot of power. They're getting screwed over the same we are. And everything we do is for them as well. So we can have water, so we can have food. Like if they want to align themselves with something like that, that's silly.
Thank you, Jen. So before we move on, I just have two more questions left, and in I'll start with this. In recent Pueblo history, we have the Oñate shooting, and we've mentioned it on the podcast before, and we have talked about giving it some adequate time, its own podcast here coming up in the future. So I'm just wondering before we do that if you want to make any brief comments on that.
The biggest takeaway and the thing that I'd want to like focus on when talking about it is just the irony of how it happened, right? Just before everything popped off in Palestine, just before October 7th. Like Mohammed Al Kurd was there with us, right? Like the things they said about us, and I would love, I invite you to like share what you shared at the Palestine teaching in Minneapolis. Like the things they said about us, like, oh, they deserve this, they deserve to get murdered, they deserve to get assassinated for daring to speak out against this statue, for daring to celebrate that it wasn't erected. They're just so crazy. They're just so radical, um, that they invite violence like a shooter. Their signs and banners are just as bad as taking out a gun and pointing it at someone with the intention to take a life. That is literally the sentiment we get. They're just as bad. You know, why would you do that and then not expect somebody to come and attempt to murder you? Wild, right? It's wild. Same thing in Palestine. Oh, if they don't want to get killed, they shouldn't try to protect themselves from getting killed. Oh, if they don't want to get bombed, why are they resisting? Oh, they deserve it. They deserve it. Hamas is terrorists for uh, defending the people of Gaza, not knowing that Hamas is their only defense. And I'm absolutely appalled that anyone thinks they're a terrorist group. Absolutely appalled when they are the only force defending people in Gaza. Like, oh, Gazans shouldn't support Hamas, the only entity defending them from getting genocided. Who would you side with? The people bombing you or the people defending you from getting bombed? It's that simple. It's that simple. It's that simple. And so, Justine, you said it doesn't matter. Like you said, it doesn't matter if you're getting actively genocided right now, like people in Gaza. Or it doesn't matter if you're 500 years into the future, like us. Just simply protesting the erection of a colonizer statue, they're going to say the same exact thing. They're going to say the same exact thing, and they're going to call you a terrorist no matter how minuscule or how active your resistance is. It's the same thing.
I think that pretty much covers what I said. We're the original terrorists. We are indigenous because that is our political position in the process of settler colonialism. We are a contradiction to settler colonialism and settler colonial projects. We are a contradiction to the very existence of the United States. Our existence, my life, your life, our people's lives, our Pueblo's lives, our tribes. If you're indigenous, you are a terrorist to the settler state for merely existing. So when we stand up and we say that we don't want to glorify this colonizer, we don't want to glorify your settler history, that is means to be assassinated. That is means to threaten settler identity, settler existence. Does that kind of cover it?
And meanwhile, literal terrorists like Ryan Martinez, like Stephen Baca, like all of these, we see it like it's commonplace. School shootings, the white male school shooter, they don't get called terrorists. They're not called terrorists, even though they explicitly terrorize. Okay. So we've
Mhm.
talked about it many times on this podcast before, but we need to be critical of that term and when and where and how it's used. okay? Because it's not applied to actual terrorists. It's applied to people who are defending themselves from being terrorized in service of the United States occupation here and everywhere around the world. Like, so when we hear that term being thrown around, especially in the US media, we've got to really, really be critical of who and why is being called that, who's being called that and why they're being called that, right? We know we're not terrorists for doing something as minuscule as showing up to a platform with signs and banners. We can't even celebrate without being terrorized by people who are trying to defend the settler state, right? It doesn't matter how much you sympathize and empathize with the United States. That is the status you occupy as a Native person because Native people remind the US settler state of its failure, just as Palestinians remind the Israeli occupation of its failure and of its illegitimacy. Illegitimacy, right? Illegitimacy. The US is illegitimate. Israel's illegitimate,
And they are both not in control, and especially now.
especially they're flailing.
And we'll give this conversation the time and attention that it needs, regarding Onyate shootings. That is something I believe that we're planning this year at this point. I kind of like speaking like iffy about it just because like Ryan Martinez. His case is coming up in May. I don't know how to speak about it before the trial, so we'll talk more about that later. And also bringing in Jacob Johns onto the podcast for that conversation too. Yeah, so uh subscribe to our Patreon to sustain our media work. um so lastly, I just want to ask you, Jen, we're right at an hour. Let's close it up with this question. What are your hopes and dreams for Pueblo people? Um what are your hopes and dreams for men, women, children, leaders, like all of it?
Well, these are huge questions that I can't answer so concisely, but I want us to be able to live with dignity. I want us to be able to live without fear. I want us to be able to live in such a way that doesn't require us to push down and deny essential aspects of our reality to just be able to have peace. I don't want our peace to be hinged on denying fundamental things about our reality and lived experience. I want us to live in a world that we can fully embrace and accept without fear. I want us to live in a world that is worth defending and protecting. I want us to build nations that can meet everybody's needs and that can bolster the life of all life on this planet. I want us to regain our empathy in such a way that reminds us that we pray for the world because the well being of the world and people across oceans means our well being as well, means our survival. The way we pray for the world first and ourselves last. So why don't we act the way we pray? Like, we won't build anything from being isolationists. We won't build anything alone. We need support. We need to build our relationship strong in order to preserve our ways. I see a world where we caretake our land again and we have the opportunity to do so. I see a world where we can revive our languages without depending on nonprofits and grants and X, Y, and Z. I want to live in a world where our identities aren't constructed for us in service to a settler project. I want to see us embrace, you know, I want to see us embrace our true selves, regardless of how that is perceived by anyone else. I want us to see ourselves living fruitfully without any symbolic representation, native celebrities or brown faces in high places. I want us to build something that we actually derive power from, right? The power to be self-determining peoples. I want to live in a world where everybody has food and water and education and housing and their basic needs met regardless of anything. Regardless of anything. Like, I want to see our wealth come directly back to us, not siphoned away from us. Like, that's what I want to see. And we know how to build that. We see the people who are building it. We see the way they get punished for it. By the United States and other imperialist powers who don't like the way they're defending themselves from having their wealth and life siphoned from them. I I want to live in that world where we can just be human, where we can just be human again, not driven by hatred, not driven by death, not driven by selfishness and greed and individualism. And anybody who thinks that's far fetched or that's wishful thinking, that's really sad. It's really sad for you. Like, I can't imagine. That's the ultimate demoralization. That's the ultimate sign of hopelessness. If you think those things are impossible, like, I hope you are empowered enough to believe otherwise someday.
No, absolutely. I have conversations with my own relatives where they have simply already given up. They've accepted that we're going to lose our languages. They accepted that we're going to die as a people, and they've accepted our extinction. And I I too wish them the power to dream that, to dream of a Pueblo future, to dream of Pueblo people existing 100 years from now, 150, hundreds and hundreds of years beyond the existence of the United States. So just thank you so much, Jen. Thank you for being a leader. Thank you for being an inspiration. Thank you for being my comrade. And thank you for bringing me to the Red Nation. I love you, dog.
I love you, dog. And honestly, I'm just some rando. Like, again, I'm not special. And in the words of our dear relative, Myris Chino, also well known, amazing activist, community organizer, and leader, he said, I'll never forget it, you don't even need courage to do these things. You don't even need courage. You just need to do them. And whatever comes after is what comes after, but it's always worth it. It's always worth it. So, with that, my greatest and sincerest prayer, the thing I pray for every time I pray, is for empowerment for Pueblo people to believe that there is a future, that there is a way out of here. Um, that self love, that trust in the self and in each other, to believe that a greater world exists for us. We don't have to live. We don't have to live in denial, and we don't have to live in fear. We're more powerful than we realize. So let's remember our power, let's remember our strength, and let's believe what we say, and let's believe what we pray.
Let's build the Pueblo plurinationalist state. Hey, and let's build our Pueblo future. Let's be good ancestors. Kunta wahadawa et Jen.